everyone, and welcome once again to the Open Mic, Writers in Their Own Words, the show where every episode I talk to writers, editors, agents, and occasionally others from the publishing game to learn a little bit more about them and the work that they do. I am your host, Rich Eisen. As I've had to explain of late, I'm not that other Rich Eisen on the NFL Network. I actually had an interaction with somebody who I'm pretty sure thought they were talking to that Rich Eisen. Probably he was disappointed, but anyway, I'm my Rich Eisen. So there you go. My show, is available on both YouTube and via all of the major podcast platforms. And you can subscribe to either or to both, so you never miss a thing. That, of course, would be my preference, but hey, you do you. Now, my guest today has had an illustrious career writing so many things, from screenplays and game worlds to novels and poetry. She's authored numerous novels and short stories. She's won multiple Bram Stoker awards, which for the uninitiated are the major award for those writing in the horror genre, which might lead you to ask, well, why would I, a crime fiction devotee, have a horror author on my show? Well, the answer is actually, I think, kind of obvious. We recently met at Left Coast Crime, sitting at the bar, of course. And I thought, well, she's just awesome to talk to. And she had a lot of interesting to say that I thought writers in any genre would find useful. So here she is, Maria Alexander. Welcome to the Open Mic. How are you doing today?
Hi, everybody. Hi, Rich. I'm doing great. And we can definitely dive into why crime fiction, because I actually myself write a lot of crime fiction in addition to horror. And I was one of my books that won a Bram Stoker award was also nominated for an Anthony Award. Yeah. So it's I do a lot of cross genre, a lot of crossover writing that way.
Well, we will definitely talk about that. In fact, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going to skip to my second question. And let's touch on that one first, which was, again, what was a devout horror and fantasy person like yourself even doing at a crime writers conference?
Well, I mean, I've been to many because not only do I do a lot of my stories, are they cross genre? They're like mystery and horror, thriller and horror. I've written one book under a nom de plume it's Quentin Banks. And it's a thriller satire called No Rhyme Goes Unpunished. And it's about a serial killer who's killing all the worst poets in L.A. And the LAPD homicide detective who's trying to stop him, even though no one wants him to. So that's, I love crime fiction and I love writing it. I've had stories I had one story in a Sherlock Holmes anthology recently that I think was nominated for an Anthony. Might have won. I can't remember. But I was definitely had another short story, a crime fiction story that was in the Shattering Glass anthology that definitely won the Anthony. And it's a genre I've loved my whole life. And so I was really missing my crime fiction family. So that was why I went to Left Coast. It was, one of my besties, Krista Faust. She lives up in the Pacific Northwest now. And so I said, well, I get to, kill two birds with one stone. I get to see Krista. I get to see my crime fiction friends. And I got to be on a panel with Laurie King. Like, how great is that? Right. And And then I was like, what am I doing here? But it was really nice. And then I got to rekindle all those relationships. I hadn't been to a genre convention since before the pandemic. So I was missing everybody.
Well, and it's a great conference. And I've talked about this before on the show. Left Coast Crime is really cool because it's smaller than some of the other big mystery writers and thrillers conferences. It's a little more intimate. You can actually have conversations with people. Not a lot of editors and agents. In fact, I don't think there's any agents there. So you don't have the thing where you're talking to somebody, but they're actually looking over your shoulder to see if the agent they're stalking has just walked into the bar.
Exactly. Yeah.
Look, there is a place for that in a writer's world. There is a place. Well, we're going to talk a little later about the agent quest, but it's nice to go to a place where you're just interacting mostly with writers and fans, wherever you fit at on that spectrum, and you learn a lot. You get to meet folks. You get to have conversations where you can actually hear yourself talk. So, of course, I asked the question initially, very tongue in cheek. It was, I absolutely understand the connection of your work to horror, but I thought that was a good thing to get us rolling here. I have one.
Yeah, for sure.
I have one more though, because I love this. And for those again who might not be familiar with Maria's work, I'm going to dig a description you gave of yourself from the past, and we're gonna see how you feel about it today, because you once described yourself this way, and this is a long one, but bear with me, everybody. Lady Euthanasia, the sweet pea of darkness, queen of the wild things, she who wears the fabulous boots, Lady Flashheart, with a wolf in there, runs with scissors, dances with werewolves, a smart tart with a big heart, and Betty Page's stunt double. I pulled that out from a long time ago. How much of that description matches you today?
There's still a lot. I'm still a smart tart with a big heart. But I've been faithfully married now for 8 years. So there's been since Brett and I got together 15 years ago, there's been a lot less tartness only with him. And then let's see, I know a redhead, that part. So I'm no longer Betty Page's double. I've had red hair for many years now. It's like you reach sometimes with some women, probably men too, you reach a certain age and you can't do that black, and it's just okay, I've got, and then they become what is that other genre called? The rockabilly people, moving to rockabilly or something. And I'm just okay, no, I'm not doing that. But I still run with scissors. I've been, studying various sword arts, for over 20 years. I don't wear as many boots. I had a foot surgery about 10 years ago. I still wear boots, but they're all Docs. I think you probably saw some of those, when I was there at the conference. Yeah, boots, but not spiky kinds of boots. They're still fabulous. There's still a lot. Lady Flashheart, definitely, very adventurous, very how else could I guess swoop into a conversation with AJ Devlin, it's just
right
guy, yeah. So
a guy who walks around with a prop banana or two hanging on his belt, Well, again, I'm gonna and of course for those of you who aren't familiar, if you're new to the show, AJ's been on the show before. Great writer, great crime writer. He writes with a lot of humor. We're gonna talk about humor here in a little bit, but AJ was part of that bar discussion too, and just a great guy. I've actually got one of his fellow Canadian writers coming up on the show in a few weeks too. So,
great.
Another great part of conferences, you get to meet a lot of folks outside of your normal zone. That's fabulous.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned swordplay, and I wanted to ask you about that, because I understand you're a big fan of swordplay. And no, I'm not using some weird euphemism here. I mean, we're talking about real, actual swords.
Yes.
Tell me about how this came to be and how you use this interest and experience in your writing.
Well, so probably around 2002, I think it was. But I'd moved to LA in 97 because I did a film mentorship with Clive Barker. That's what brought me to LA. Not long after that, the people that I kept meeting and befriending were stunt people. Just somehow I just kept meeting stunt people. and having like, like maybe a little bit of relationships with them, like whatever. I kept being in that world. And I discovered that they taught these stunt classes where you learn to choreograph sword fights for film and stage. And that just lit a fire under me. I was like, oh my God, you can do this like for real. And so I started studying with all these different stunt people who specialized in sword play. And they're all people, all people who've done all kinds of work, Roberta Brown, Bob Chapin, Mark Ryan, Richard Ryan, who is actually a UK swordsman. But he's actually at one point, he just come from coordinating all the fights for the movie Troy. And at that point, I had been studying with TJ Rotello for a year, a small sword. That's my favorite, small sword. And I just slipped right into a class that he did. Like I was working directly with his stunt people without any trouble because I'd been studying with TJ. Now, did I use any of this in actual working things? No, I just loved it. I just did it because I loved it. And so, but as time passed, I went to France for a year in 2006, 2007. And I discovered this historical character named Julie d'Aubigny, also known as La Maupin. And she was one of Europe's deadliest swordswomen. She was always killing people in duels. Louis XIV thought it was hilarious that a woman was killing men. Like he let her do whatever she wanted. And she only got in trouble when she was like kissing girls. That was it. Nobody wanted her to kiss girls. So anyway, really famous. And I became completely obsessed with her. And I have been obsessed with her ever since. And I have recently completed a novel about her with her in her late teens. And right around the age where she's discovering she's both badass and bisexual. And I mean, there was a lot of her that I could relate to as well. She later became an opera star. I love to sing. That's where Lady Euthanasia comes from. And that's sort of where it started coming into my writing. I haven't really done much sword play in my writing until I wrote this novel with Julie. And it didn't even appeal to me. Like I just, and then I later went on, I was studying Japanese swordsmanship, Shinkendo, for 7 years. And during that time was when I became really active in fandom, encountering the horrible stereotypes of women with swords. And a blog post I wrote went viral on the issue. And some people were really mad, bro. They did not like what I had to say, but a lot of people were also like, oh my God, you're right. We treat women with swords as like sex objects, and we have them handling the swords in really horrible ways. So they look like they're going to hurt themselves. And, anyway, so I've probably, up until I wrote the Julie book, had written more nonfiction because I went on to write a number of articles for different magazines about this issue than I did fiction. So because people wanted to know, like, well, how do we portray women positively? I'm like, well, you portray them the way you portray men. They will fuck you up. Oh, we can say F words, right, on this? It's okay.
Yes, you can. I'm not trying to get a G rating for it.
Okay, I didn't think so.
But... Yeah, I've had Joe Clifford on this show a couple of times. I guarantee.
Never mind then.
There's nothing anyone else could say. I mean, Joe is about as direct and raw as a person gets, right? And look, I'm like a chameleon. If he starts talking that way, my inner blue collar guy comes out, and then so no, you're good.
All right. So I would have, so anyway, it'd probably be up until recently more nonfiction. So you might find articles that I've written online about, all the stupid things. I think one of them was like the 4 worst things you can do with a sword in film and fiction, or, something like that. Like we're talking about.
What I find interesting here, over the course of this show, I've had 3 very accomplished swordsmen, writers who are very accomplished with swords. Our mutual friend, Jonathan Mayberry, of course, is one.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But, and yourself, and Meredith Lyons, who was just on the show about a month or two ago.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And who's also of an award-winning, has, competes in international competitions. And
she's a fencer, right? She's a fencer? Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so interesting to me that 2 of the 3 expert swords people I have had on this show are women. So,
yeah.
Well, and I want to follow up on that. Again, I was going to ask this a little later, but, you go with the flow here. Lost my train of thought there for a second. I apologize. Horror has not always been a very welcoming place for women writers, right? And this week, as we are recording this show today, this week here in the world has just been really infected with this. The whole world is a tither over this horrifically misogynistic and lots of other ists speech that this idiot for the Kansas City Chiefs.
God.
And so everyone is talking about it.
Yeah.
I don't know if we want to go down that rabbit hole, but I know sexism has been a problem in the mystery world, in the crime fiction world, but it's also been a problem for a long time in the horror genre, where there was this idea that women did not write horror. Now, clearly that has been disproven on multiple levels for years. But how do you see the field today in terms of how open it is to having somebody like yourself writing in dark fantasy, straight horror, whether it's for adults or in the YA world? How do you see the genre as it pertains to welcoming female writers?
I mean, it's like night and day from when I first started writing. It's really night and day. Things have changed so dramatically, and there are so many fantastic female writers now. I remember, like, back in the early aughts, we would sit and we would take the Bram. I remember one day myself looking at the Bram Stoker Awards at the nominations, and I said, okay, there's I don't remember the exact numbers, so please nobody bite my head off. It's there was something 32 nominees, and one was a woman, or 2 were women. I'm just are you fucking kidding me? It was ridiculous. And then I continued for a while. I'll never forget, in Utah where the World Horror Convention in 2008. I had been writing short stories. I'd started writing my first book, but I was getting published, but I was sending out my stories all the time, and it would go into the ether. And then I'd see guys getting published I knew were not as good a writer as I was. I was like, come on, this is an objective fact. This person can barely spell. Why is he, he's in this. And then, so what happened was in Utah, in Salt Lake City, I went to a panel that I was not invited to. I was just went as an attendee. And it was all of these big, at the time, a lot of the Grail magazine editors for these horror magazines. And I stood up and I said, why have I never heard from any one of you motherfuckers when I submit a story? Is it because I'm a woman? And the whole crowd was like, ah, what is happening? And there was actual turmoil. And the guys on the panel, they were and they were just all aflutter. And I'm like, I never hear back from any of you ever. Why? And they, it's just, we're not talking about the days when their emails are getting flooded by AI stories. We're talking 2008. So anyway, afterwards, that's when I became friends with Scott Edelman, because he kind of walked out with me and he's like, do you really never hear back when you submit stories? I said, yeah. that's why so many of my stories were getting picked up on online magazines like Gothic Net and Chiaroscuro magazine, like, because I had mutual friends who I could say, like, if something didn't happen, right, I could say, hey, but if I didn't know anybody, but that was the thing. Like, it turned out good people know people. So if my friends were like, San Francisco people or, Canada people or whatever, were running these friends of friends were running these magazines, I knew that they were open-minded, fair-minded people. And so that's where I was getting published, not because I knew them, but because, there were the kind of people who would actually respond to it and submitting a story. So, that's.
But it sounds like you feel like it's gotten better.
It's gotten so much better. I am positive that Tananarive is going to win. She's going to win Best Novel this year. I'm absolutely positive with the Reformatory, because she is an incredible writer and she's writing about incredibly important issues, all at the same time writing something so fantastically creepy and scary. I mean, like, traditional horror. She's, in a lot of ways, she's kind of like she and Sean Cosby kind of do the same thing. And she's definitely doing that thing in the Reformatory because it's set in a school that was a real school, a boys' school for young men of color, where they would be murdered. I mean, they'd be murdered, they'd be beaten to death, that kind of thing. It's a really terrifying place. And but she's killing it. She is, and her husband, Stephen Barnes, is actually a mentor of mine. And he's incredible. So she's also a martial artist. So like there are just so many great women writers. Lisa Morton, fantastic writer, I've known for many years. It's really changed in some dramatic ways. And now the president of the HWA, well, the president was Lisa Morton for many years. Now it's John Lawson, who's a man of color. And he was the first publisher. He published Mr. Wicker and he published Snowed, both of my books that won Bram Stoker Awards. So, I mean, that was like, were we ever going to see a president of the HWA that was, a person of color? Finally, it had happened after many years. So there's been some big changes. It's been really positive. I'm really hopeful for the genre at large.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great because, I remember, things like not that long ago, seeing Tabitha King being referred to at a major publication as Stephen King's wife. And it's like, she's done a lot of her own books, bruh. She's a really, really good, accomplished writer. Well,
that's the media. Yeah.
God almighty. I get embarrassed for my colleagues sometimes. It's like, you need to grab your shoulders, pull real hard and see if you can pop your head out of your lower GI, because that is such a easy thing to fix. Just pay attention, I'm really trying to stop myself from going down the rabbit hole on this other stuff I started with about this idiot. But anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. What draws you to the horror genre or dark fantasy? Because there's, as with crime fiction, there's a whole spectrum from pulpy noir all the way to thriller-esque. But what in that spectrum of horror, what we generally call horror, what is the draw for you there, and particularly as it applies to YA?
I think for me, as we talk about YA in particular, kids they're not afraid of anything. They're immortal. Like they don't even think that they can die, And so when you put a young person in a situation where they could very easily die. Like it's extremely dangerous. It's entertaining actually to watch them be completely stupid, because they're just not thinking of self-preservation, right? They don't understand that. And I think, and specifically like when I wrote Snowed, that because that had a supernatural element to it, that taps into that part of childhood, and it happens in the teenage years where some part of them still believes in Santa Claus. Some part of them still does. And even if it's not Santa Claus, it's vampires, it's werewolves, it's fairies. It's like something they still very intensely and passionately believe in these things. So, but they're expected at any minute to turn, to split the switch and then become an adult and denounce all of these things. And I love that cusp of having characters on that cusp of where they're expected to flip that switch, but something gives them a hard pull back, and where they find that they're trapped. And they want to be an adult. They want to drive a car. They want to do, all these things, but they get yanked back into this horrible, this other world. It turns out to be much darker than they thought it was. It still manages to dispel their fantasies, but it's even much darker than that. Horror in general for me, though, I've always had a spooky life. So it really speaks to my own life in a lot of ways. And I would say even the crime fiction, it's the same way. Like the story that I wrote for Shattering Glass was called Dangerous Deductions. And it was based on something, my father was an investigator for the Franchise Tax Board. And it was based on something really stupid that he did that, let's just say my mom was furious when she found out he was doing it with us kids with him in the car. Like what he would do is he would go up into the Hollywood Hills and he would dumpster dive in like rich people. So, and he was investigating this drug dealer. And I mean, it was scary stuff. We kids thought it was so exciting, but it was really bad. And I'll never forget the day when my mom found out. I told my mom what we'd been doing, and she got really upset. And I was thinking, yeah, but Daddy had his gun, and it was okay.
Wow.
No, it's not okay. And my whole family is like that. Like we have all these stories that are like the Coen brothers, when it comes to crime. And so that draws me to crime fiction in a big way, because I love the idea of like, wow, we've got a lot of it in my family. And so there's this familiarity in it that's exciting and comforting at the same time.
And I will, because you've brought it up a couple times, and I wanted to chime in here. If you haven't seen the anthology Shattering Glass, I highly recommend it. It's really, really good. Now, I love anthologies. I love short story collections. I love them with themes. I told this story maybe at a Left Coast or BoucherCon. I can't remember, a couple years ago. I was talking to an agent at a conference in San Diego in the mid-1990s. And I was trying to sell her on this nonfiction book that I was writing, and she was not at all interested. And I said, well, and she kind of asked, she didn't really ask, but I think she was just trying to be polite, but she kind of asked in a way if I was working on anything else. And I said, well, I had this idea about writing a whole bunch of short stories based on songs by the Rolling Stones. And she goes, that's a great idea. You should follow up on that one. Well, because I'm really not a very smart guy, I didn't do that. And of course, now those kinds of music anthology collection are
all over the place.
Jimmy Buffett, they're the fucking Go-Go's, right? It's crime fiction based on music by the Go-Go's, for Christ's sake.
Those Hollies.
It's everywhere. And I
was never supposed to write for that too.
No one had ever heard of one. So I'm not saying I came up with the idea that no one else had ever had. I'm just saying I also had the idea, and I wasn't smart enough to follow up on it. But I've always loved those kinds of anthologies, and Shattering Glass, which deals with, just like it sounds, women, dealing with their lives in a very male-dominated environment, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a great piece. Or a great collection. I highly recommend it. A lot of great writers in there. A lot of people I know well that are in there. It was Valerie Plame, I believe, was one of the editors of that collection. So, and if you don't know who Valerie Plame is, look, Google it. I'm not going to take time here to explain. Good. Anyway,
right.
Along those lines, and I look, I hope this question is not too invasive. So feel free to tell me that's too invasive, move on.
Right.
But you have written, I think, very eloquently, speaking of your parents, about some of the personal traumas in your life and your family's lives. And yeah, look, I also grew up very rough. I don't think it sounds like anything compared to your upbringing. But how I know how it has impacted me for the bulk of my life, and I'm 60 years old, so I feel like I have a very good understanding of what childhood trauma does to you as an adult.
Yeah.
How has that impacted your writing, either as a novelist or a poet or a screenwriter, just your writing in general? How would you say that those experiences have shaped you as a writer?
Well, so when I was in college, I took a poetry writing class, and my teacher, her name is Dr. Catherine Holwine, and I just thought the world of her. She was really great. And she said, the way that you make a poet is that you take a sensitive person and you hurt them. And I think that hurting a sensitive person is certainly does something happens to that creative process. I was a very creative kid from very, very young. And I think that after a certain point, especially once I started to realize what the trauma was, to really understand the trauma, then a lot of the writing went towards dealing with that trauma. And like I wrote The King of Shadows, which was my first real short story. I mean, I'd written short stories in college. My husband loves one that I wrote. It's a little horror story about a cat that raised the dead. And I mean, like, it's a great story. It's called Prisons. But I'm like, no. The first real short story I wrote was The King of Shadows. And it was about my father. And I feel like in that story, when I wrote it, at the time, I was freshly, I'd been acquainted with Neil Gaiman for about a year. We'd been emailing back and forth. And I sent it to him. And the only thing he said back was, lovely story, really good. And that was it. And I think and it told me also that when I feel like horror is the genre that allows us to really explore that trauma. And so I was definitely in the right place to do it and to explore it. That said, I feel like it also sort of, I mean, I would have still probably been a horror writer, but I don't think that I would have turned my attention to family issues. I don't think I would be writing about childhood. I don't think that's where I think I would be still writing like Lovecraftian pastiche and like, you know what I mean? Like, and that might have gotten better and I'd probably be more famous. But no, I decided that I had to, and then it wasn't, and so eventually, I started writing more about my sister, and I couldn't write about my sister for many years, not until my asshole father died, frankly, because he was crazy and he was litigious, and I think he would have definitely like gone after me if I'd posted anything in public about my sister, even though he didn't have like, but once he finally died, I was able to write about what happened to my sister in that blog post, Sister Interrupted. And that also went viral because people saw, it started with her schoolmates, her former schoolmates, because she had been cut off and nobody knew what had happened to her exactly. They knew she'd been hurt. They knew she'd been in a coma. They knew all these things, but my parents had sort of, because of who they were, they cut her off. So those experiences, it's not like they just stop in childhood. If you don't have good parents, it just kind of continues on and continues to, create more and more painful experiences. And definitely, like, I have a story that I wrote recently. It's a memoir piece called Light Torn from the Stars. And it's about what happened starting the day that my father died, and having to drive suddenly up to take care of my sister. She had no preparations for her. My dad had left her, kind of in the wind, and she's severely disabled. So, like, these things just continue to happen, and they impact you deeply. And I think the older we get, the more deeply they impact us, and we realize, oh my God, she was severely disabled, and he was pretending like nothing was wrong, and he died in his sleep. And there she was. It's like, you just become more and more aware that, like, wow, this is fucked up. And you find it makes you more compassionate.
Mm-hmm.
Right? It really instills an amount of compassion. Also, has really affected my day job. It's the compassion. I can't do that work either. Especially can't do that work. That's, it's critical. So it's probably really long-winded, but it didn't just stop in childhood. I think that's why I kept going.
Well, and I think it leads to another element of writing. So, I was really into horror as a younger person, and I, of course, like, somebody growing up in the 70s, I read every word of Stephen King's I could get my hands on. But one of the things that I found the most appealing about his writing was he had a very deft way of using humor to diffuse a little bit of the tension that he was creating with the rest of what he was writing.
Right.
And it wasn't like yuckity yuck, that kind of thing at all. There's a scene in the Stand where I think it's Stu is trying to, I think he's got to climb a levee or do something. He's got to do this physical thing, and he's been a little injured, and this dog that he's kind of picked up on path just like either runs up or down this levee like nothing, and in his head Stu goes, fucking show off dog, and it made me laugh out loud because that's such I cannot think of another writer who would have written that, but that's what any human would think, is like, I'm struggling like all get out, and this dink.
Yes.
And so to this day, obviously I have dogs. If you're watching on YouTube, you know about my dogs. Yes, they can do things I can't do. And I always joke about them having 4-paw drive and all this stuff. And it all goes back to that line I read in The Stand in like whatever year that came out, 1979 or whatever it was.
Yeah, very formative year. Yeah.
So I've always really noticed when people who write very serious stuff also have a way of infusing humor in it. And of course, that's my long-winded way of saying that is a real trademark of your writing, is you really use a lot of humor. And again, it's not the yuck slapstick stuff, but you have a way of getting people or characters to talk or describe a situation. Give me just a little bit about, your thoughts on using humor in writing dark fantasy or horror.
I think depending on the tone that you're setting, it does help to offset the tension. Like, in one of my short stories, Quid Pravus Pro Quo, that was actually based on something that really happened to me. And it was extremely spooky and extremely scary. And I liked sort of offsetting it with like talking about my cats, Like there are rules about cats, like rule 1, cats lie, And so like as we're layering like all these incredibly spooky events, then every once in a while there's a rule, like the cats do something silly, and I go, oh yeah, rule 2, cats, I don't even remember all the rules, just the first one. Um but it's like trying to like put in little things like that like you're saying about like King, he knows that psychologically that's what we do to try to self-nurture and to calm ourselves. We bring in some humor. I do it at work all the time. Like when things get heavy, I work in health insurance. It's like it can get pretty dark. We're talking about helping people, use their insurance and not die, and things like that. It's like it can be life or death, and just using that, and people can get very they get that seriousness, and they don't realize, oh, this is not good for your body. So we need to laugh. But the same thing in horror, is like using that humor to diffuse. I've not written anything that was purely humor. I don't think I would want to, other than like that thriller satire. I mean, that was, but not with horror. I love horror humor. I love, the Shawns of the Dead and Dale and Evil, or whatever, Tucker and Dale.
Yeah.
Versus Evil. Yeah, whatever. Like all those kinds of things. One of my favorites is Troll Hunter.
Yes, I love that.
Oh my God, I love Troll Hunter.
Yeah.
It's just, I saw it in the theater with a friend who was a movie critic, and we went to, it was a journalist, she's a journalist, so I saw it in a screening, and I was howling. And I mean, like, it was just the best thing to me to have that, but I don't think I would write that. That wouldn't be quite my style. It would be,
right.
If I did more humor, it would be like the crime, like Dangerous Deductions. There's more humor in that than anything,
Right.
So,
well,
and Cumberbachelor.
Let me ask you about something that's not remotely funny.
Okay.
The whole agenting process. And we talk a lot about agents on this show, and as I've said, again, if people, regular audience, you've heard me know that I'm on my 3rd agent. And I've never had a horrible experience. I mean, I had a great agent previous to this one, but then he stopped. He brought to me when I was doing nonfiction, and he didn't do fiction. So when I moved in that area, I was like out of luck, had to start looking again. And my first agent was a screwball, but that was a long time ago. And but that process is soul sucking. And I know just from of late that you're in that process now of looking for a new agent. And how's it going? And how is the process for you? Have you learned any tips? Is there anything about it that has changed over the course of your career that comes to mind?
I think you have to meet them first. I'm starting to really feel like you don't have a real chance unless you're in a room with them, or you meet them at a party or something like that. It's starting because, so here's the thing. So I never found an agent for Mr. Wicker. I wound up just going with it on my own. And then I found an agent with Snowed. And it was with Trident Media Group. And
That's a biggie.
And I loved my agent, Alex. He's wonderful, Alex Slater. But what happened was when Cemetery Dance came out with my short fiction collection, 12 Tales Lie, I was talking to Alex. I said, so, I've been blurbing a lot of people's books, a lot of the other clients' books. And so I said, hey, I got this collection coming out. Is there somebody in the agency, one of the other clients who could blurb my book? And he came back with one of his other clients who was a middle grade writer. And I was like, I mean, he's awesome, but like, this is really saucy writing. Like, there's a lot of erotic horror in this. There's a lot of stuff in here. And I don't think that would be quite appropriate. And so what happened was I was like, there's got to be somebody. What happened to Silberman or Silverback or whatever? And I'm like looking on the website, and I realized that 2/3 of the agents were gone. And I did more digging, and that's what I found. And Mark Gottlieb had been out doing bad things and ruining the agency and its reputation. And it was just past, this is happening just after my deadline for my contract renewal with them. And I just told Alex, like, oh, look, I'm out. I didn't even really say what. I mean, like, I just like, I'm out. You know, because I knew that anything that he sent out of mine after that, it was tainted. It was poisoned by Mark Gottlieb. So I've been looking ever since. And now the problem is that, and I've talked with Michael Marshall Smith about this a lot, is, you know, when you're somebody who writes a lot of different things, it's really hard to get an agent who will rep all your things. You know, you have to find the one agent who will rep for the one thing, and then you're on your own for the other stuff. And so that's where I'm at right now. I've been, you know, querying a lot of agents, and I think I queried a lot of agents way too soon on the Llama handbook. It really wasn't ready when I was querying a lot of agents, and now very few people are like even responding. Like, and I think part of the problem is they're getting inundated with the AI shit, and so there's a lot of like I've been like, a friend of mine responded to that thread of mine on Facebook. She's like, oh, but what about this person? They look at their wish list. And I'm like, yeah, I queried her 8 months ago and she never responded.
Yeah.
You know, I think they're getting like just blasted. So again, you know, it's incredibly hard. I understand why some of the youngs now are like, well, I'm just going to self-publish because there's no point. I can't get agents. I can't. And I feel that just makes me cry because, I mean, the people who really have the ability to penetrate the market are the big publishers, you know, especially for YA. And I don't know what I'm going to do for any of these books, especially the new one, The Ascension. I mean, that's a horror thriller. That's a YA horror thriller. But I'm going to be really pushing it as more broadly, with a more broad adult appeal, because the kids are really gritty and they swear a lot. And the girl, it's about this girl whose parents are assassins for the dead. Her whole family are assassins for the dead. So I'm thinking, like, this is really dark. So, I mean, not that there's any limit with YA really, but yeah, I've got to change my tune, you know, if I'm going to survive. I think especially for YA, it's really hard. No,
well,
I'm going to
information for people. I hope people understand the question in the way that I mean it, which is, it is hard. Anyone that is getting, I mean, the one thing I like to think about in this show is that, you know, I try to get into the reality of the business a lot, and it is a business. And the thing I tell people all the time is you have to decide going in what it is you want out of it. You know, whether it's you know, I want to just get something out there. I'm not, you know, whatever. I don't care whatever, if it sells, whatever, fine. Mm-hmm. I want a Big 5 contract with Simon & Schuster and a great New York agent. Great. Really hard to do, but hey, if that's the only thing that will make you happy, that's great. And there's a million slots in between, but you got to decide, because this is the stuff that happens, and you've got to go with your eyes wide open on this, because it's too much work and it's too much heartache. And if you have this expectation and all you can get is this, there's a lot of heartache here, because it's a creative thing. It's like you're birthing, you know, Godzilla. So, you know, if you're going to do that, you might as well.
Some of us feel that more than others. Yeah. Anyway, I just was trying to talk to people about not being afraid of using literary attorneys to look at contracts. You know, people are so afraid of lawyers. It's like, get over it, because the world is out to eat you. So you need attorneys to keep them from eating you. And an agent would do that for you. But a lot of times it's good to also have a literary attorney looking at your shit in addition to the agent, because the agent has their own agenda, right? And then purportedly it's to protect you. But you it's kind of like getting two people looking at your house, two inspectors on the house that you buy, not just the one your real estate agent gives you, but the one, getting another one to come in and give you the real down DL, because it's like everybody's got their own agenda. So at any rate, the literary attorneys are great, and they can be extremely helpful even if you find yourself like at the indie level, or if you just want to deal with indie publishers. There's nothing wrong with that. There's lots of many fantastic indie publishers, and that are not the big five, but that have great distribution. Actually, somebody at Entangled right now is reading the Lama Pan book. So I mean, like, that's it, independent, but you can bet that if by some miracle they decide they want to move forward, I will have a literary attorney on my side looking at that contract.
It's a great point, because, I guarantee you, on the publishing side, the editorial side, the agenting side, they're looking every moment of this as a business. Mm-hmm. So you have got to protect yourself. Mm-hmm. I know on the creative side, it's hard to look at your work and think of it in that way. And, you get offered a contract and you're like, woo, and, you're doing the happy dance around your office. But if that contract screws you, then you didn't advance yourself at all. So you really do. That's great advice to go get an attorney, spend the money, have them look at it the same way you would a copy editor, the same way you would a developmental editor, the same way you would if you're going to get a really good,
hire an expert.
Yes, don't try to wear every hat, because you try to do everything, and what you end up doing is you end up screwing yourself. So, I like to end the show on what I hope is a fun question. I mean, for it to be a fun question. Anyone who's been in the audience before, they know I do this. I'm now the omnipotent person. I can put you together with one of these three people for conversation, drinks, whatever it is, whatever makes you happy. But you can only choose one. And the options that I am going to give you today are the great Mary Shelley. And again, if you don't know who Mary Shelley is, I'm not sure why you're listening to this show, but Mary Shelley, Anne Rice, or Bram Stoker. I can get you together with one of those three: Mary Shelley, Anne Rice, or Bram Stoker. Who would you choose and why?
I would choose Mary Shelley, because she was such an incredible independent woman. Living the life. She was just doing what she wanted to do. And people, I would love to talk to her about the actual process of writing Frankenstein. People say she wrote it at 19. She didn't. She wrote the first draft at 19. She continued to rewrite it for many, many years. But I would love to talk to her and, just tell her what an impact she made on so many women. So many women.
Yeah.
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 I mean, I love Anne Rice. I met her. I'm good.
I wondered, often when I pick a modern person, I always wonder, well, there's a chance they've met that person, but, she's such an icon. I thought, well, hard to know. And she's kind of, I wouldn't say reclusive, but she's older. And I thought, well, she's a little removed from the public eye now. So
she was at Thriller Fest one of the last times I went. I think it was at Thriller Fest. Yeah, she was around. It was in the bathroom. Yeah. That's the thing, is like, I do know a lot of amazing people, and that's hard to not compare myself to them, to the Neils and the Clives and it's very hard.
It's hard, but boy, you got to convince yourself not to, because it's such a losing proposition for 99% of the world.
It totally is.
How can you ever compare to Clive Barker or Neil Gaiman in your own eyes? Even you could win the next 10 Bram Stokers, and you would probably still not think of yourself in that vein, right? It's just so difficult for obvious reasons, right?
Oh my God, no.
For obvious reasons.
Right. No.
Well,
yeah.
Maria, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been fun. I left probably a half dozen questions on the cutting room floor because we just kept yakking about other things, but I love it. It's a great conversation.
Thank you so much. Thanks for letting me just yak.
It's fun. It's fun. I always want this show to be as conversational as possible. I hope the folks who tune in on a regular basis enjoy that as well. As I often say, I'm not selling anything. I don't have advertising on this show. Everything here is just simply to be a way for us to share as much information as possible with folks who might be interested in writing or aspiring or just fans or whatever. It's really meant to be a straightforward connection between great, very talented folks like yourself and folks who want to hear what talented folks like you have to say. So thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. If you haven't seen Maria's work, look it up. She's in a million anthologies. She's got, I'm going to go back just really quickly before I sign us off here. Mention them briefly, and this is one of the questions I had to ditch, but her 2014 novel, her first novel, Mr. Wicker, that won a Bram Stoker. And then her 2016 novel, Snowed, won a Bram Stoker. And I tell you, if you know anything about these awards, they are very prestigious. I'm not a big awards guy in a lot of ways, but I really do have an appreciation for how hard it is to win those things, especially as a newbie. They're so hard to win those as a newbie. You really have to stand out. So those are great accomplishments. And so go check those out if you haven't seen them. Or if you're at a writer's conference, go into the bar. Maria will probably be there, and she'll be and you can
definitely the bar
directly. So, anyway, yeah, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really appreciate it. I'll remind everybody, if you haven't done so, please hit subscribe, leave a nice review, tell a friend. Even if you don't do the first two things, tell a friend if you know someone's interested in writing. Just it's a great, cheap, i.e. free way to get a lot of good information about writing and publishing, and hopefully have a good time as well. And then, of course, the last thing I will leave you with, which is the same thing I say all the time, but I mean it every time. Tomorrow is not promised to any of us. So please, whatever you do, make today count. For my guest, Maria Alexander, for myself, Rich Eisen, for my dogs who finally, after about 100 shows, raised the ruckus and had to be kicked out. I apologize for that. Otherwise, we will see you next time on the Open Mic Writers in Their Own Words. Take care.